There are moments in your life that act as doorways. Most of the time, you do not even realize you have passed through one until you look back and see the architecture of your own past has been irrevocably altered. The room you were just in is gone, and the new one you find yourself standing in is both terrifying and beautiful in its unfamiliarity. For me, that doorway was not a grand, ceremonial archway. It was not a decision or a confession. It was the quiet, unassuming weight of Leo's head resting on my shoulder on a Tuesday night in late October, the low murmur of a forgotten documentary filling the space between us, and the sudden, paralyzing thought that if he moved, the entire world I had carefully constructed around myself would simply disintegrate. He was asleep. I knew he was, because the subtle tension he always carried in his jaw had finally gone slack, and his breathing had deepened into a slow, rhythmic current that seemed to pull the very air in the room along with it. His hair, which always looked artfully messy, was just genuinely messy now, a dark spill against the worn gray fabric of my sweater. I could feel the warmth of him seeping through the layers, a radiating heat that felt less like a physical sensation and more like an emotional truth I had been trying to deny for a decade. It was a simple, innocent thing, a friend, exhausted from a long week, falling asleep on another friend's shoulder. It happened all the time in movies, in books, in other people's lives. But it had never happened in mine. Not with him. And in that silence, with only the drone of the television for company, I understood that this simple, innocent act was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to me. Because I wanted to stay there forever. I wanted to stop time and live inside that single, fragile moment, where he was close enough to touch, and the devastating truth of my feelings for him was a silent, sleeping thing, just like he was. To understand the sheer, terrifying gravity of that moment on the couch, you would have to understand the decade that came before it. You would have to understand the silence, the distance, the careful reconstruction of a friendship that had once been the primary language of my youth. Leo and I grew up in houses that shared a backyard fence, a rickety wooden barrier that was more suggestion than boundary. Our childhoods were a blur of shared secrets whispered over that fence, of summers spent building forts in the woods behind our houses, and of a bond so complete that we rarely needed words to understand each other. He was the sun, and I was the one who, fascinated, learned to map the shadows it cast. He was all bright energy, kinetic motion, and easy laughter, while I was the quiet observer, the one with the sketchbook, and later, the camera, trying to capture the fleeting essence of the world he moved through so effortlessly. We were inseparable, an accepted fact of our small town's geography, until we were not. High school ended, and the world, as it does, pulled us apart. He went east for college, chasing a degree in economics and a spot on a prestigious rugby team, a perfect fit for his boundless energy. I went west, to a quiet arts college, to learn the technical language of light and shadow, to turn my quiet observation into a craft. We promised to stay in touch, of course. We made all the promises you make when you are 18 and believe that geography is the only real obstacle to permanence. But life has a current stronger than any promise. His world became a whirlwind of classes, parties, and grueling training schedules. Mine became a quiet solitude of darkrooms, critiques, and long, lonely walks trying to find a single, perfect image. The calls became less frequent, the texts shorter, until eventually, the silence between us was a vast, unnavigable ocean. It was not a dramatic falling out. It was a slow, quiet drifting apart, which in many ways felt sadder, more final. It was the natural erosion of time and distance, and I accepted it as another unchangeable season of life. For 8 years, he existed for me only in the curated squares of social media. I saw him with his college girlfriend, a pretty blonde with a dazzling smile. I saw him celebrating his first big job as a consultant, holding a bottle of champagne in a crowded bar. I saw him on trips to places I had only ever read about, standing on mountains and beaches, always surrounded by people, always smiling that same effortless, brilliant smile. Each picture was a small, sharp pang in my chest, a reminder of a closeness I had lost, a person I no longer knew. I built a life for myself in his absence. I graduated, found a small apartment, and began the slow, arduous process of building a career as a freelance photographer. I specialized in portraits, in capturing the quiet, unguarded moments that people rarely showed the world. It was work that suited me, allowing me to remain on the periphery, to observe, to find the truth in the spaces between words. My life was calm, ordered, and safe. And it was profoundly lonely, a fact I only admitted to myself in the dead of night, when the silence of my apartment felt less like peace and more like an accusation. Then came the phone call that collapsed a decade of distance in a single, somber sentence. It was from a mutual friend from our hometown. Mark, a boy we had both played Little League with, had died. A car accident on a slippery winter road. He was gone, and the funeral was that Saturday. The news was a shock, a sudden, brutal reminder of a life I had left behind. But beneath the grief was a sharp, undeniable current of something else: anxiety. Because I knew Leo would be there. The thought of seeing him again after so long was a complicated knot of emotions. What would we say? Would we be strangers, forced into polite conversation by a shared tragedy? Or would some echo of the boys we used to be still exist between us? I spent the days leading up to the funeral in a state of low-grade dread, rehearsing conversations in my head that I knew would never happen. The church was exactly as I remembered it, all dark wood and hushed reverence, smelling of old hymnals and wilting flowers. I saw him from across the crowded room. He was standing with his parents, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that made him look older, more serious. He was taller than I remembered, his shoulders broader. The years had sharpened the angles of his face, but his hair was still the same unruly mess, and when he turned, I saw the same familiar furrow in his brow. Our eyes met for a brief, electric moment, and in that split second, I saw a flicker of the same uncertainty I felt. He gave me a small, hesitant nod, a silent acknowledgement across the space and the years. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. After the service, people gathered in the church basement for a reception, a grim collection of lukewarm coffee and quiet condolences. I was trying to make myself as small as possible, nursing a paper cup near the wall, when a voice behind me said my name. Alex. I turned, and there he was. Up close, the changes were more apparent. There were fine lines around his eyes that had not been there before, a faint shadow of exhaustion beneath his confident posture. He looked tired. He looked human. Leo, I managed, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. An awkward silence hung between us, thick and heavy as the funereal air. He shifted his weight, running a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered so vividly it felt like a physical blow. It's been a long time, he said, stating the obvious. Yeah, it has. We stood there for another moment, two ghosts from a shared past, unsure how to navigate the present. And then, something shifted in his expression. A small, sad smile touched his lips. Remember that time in Mr. Henderson's biology class? He started, his voice suddenly lower, more intimate. When you replaced the diagram of the frog's anatomy with that cartoon you drew of Henderson as a bullfrog, and he put it on the overhead projector without looking first? The memory, buried under years of silence, surfaced with startling clarity. I remembered the collective gasp of the class, followed by a tidal wave of laughter. I remembered Mr. Henderson's face turning a shade of crimson I had never seen before or since. And despite the solemnity of the occasion, despite the grief that clung to the room like damp wool, a genuine laugh escaped me. It was a rusty and used sound, but it was real. He gave me detention for a month, I said, a smile spreading across my face. Leo's smile widened, reaching his eyes, and for a second, he was not the successful consultant in the expensive suit. He was just Leo, the boy who dared me to do it, the boy who helped me clean the erasers after school every day for that month, turning my punishment into another adventure. It was worth it, he said, his voice soft. The look on his face. It was art. And just like that, the chasm of 8 years seemed to shrink. We spent the next hour tucked away in that corner of the church basement, talking. We talked about Mark, sharing memories that were both funny and heartbreaking. And then, slowly, tentatively, we began to fill in the gaps of our own lives. He told me about his job, the endless travel, the high-stakes pressure that he thrived on, but that also wore him down. He spoke of it with a kind of weary pride, a man running a race he was not sure he wanted to win. He mentioned his ex-girlfriend, the blonde from the pictures, in a single, clipped sentence. It didn't work out, was all he said, but the way he said it suggested a depth of hurt he was not ready to explore. I told him about my photography, about the struggle and the small victories, about my quiet life. He listened with an intensity that surprised me. He asked questions, real questions, about my work, my process, my inspiration. He remembered things I had long forgotten I had ever told him. My childhood dream of photographing the northern lights, my fascination with abandoned buildings. It felt less like a reunion and more like a continuation, as if we had just paused a conversation 8 years ago and were now picking it up right where we left off. The laughter we shared that day, in the somber basement of a church, felt almost like a transgression, a small, bright pocket of warmth in the middle of a cold, gray day. It was a fragile, miraculous thing, and by the time we said our goodbyes in the parking lot, something had been rebuilt between us. "We should not let it be this long again," he said, his hands in the pockets of his suit trousers. "No," I agreed, my heart doing a slow, painful flip. "We should not." We exchanged numbers, a formality that felt both monumental and absurd. And as I drove away, I felt a dangerous, unfamiliar flicker of hope ignite in the quiet, lonely corners of my heart. A doorway had opened. I just did not know where it would lead. The shift began subtly, a change in the weather of our renewed friendship that was almost imperceptible at first. After the funeral, the texting was consistent, a steady back and forth that quickly became a part of my daily rhythm. It was mostly trivial stuff, complaints about clients, pictures of my cat, links to articles he thought I would find interesting. But woven into the mundane was a new thread of intimacy. He started calling, usually late at night, when he was in another anonymous hotel room in another city. He would sound exhausted, his voice a low rumble frayed at the edges. He would talk about his day, the frustrating meetings, the hollow successes, the crushing loneliness of living out of a suitcase. I became his confessor, his anchor in the transient world he inhabited. I would listen, offering quiet words of support, and I could almost feel him relaxing, the tension leaving his voice as we spoke. The catalyst, when it came, was not a single dramatic event, but a slow, grinding burnout. He had been working on a massive project for months, a merger that involved flying back and forth between New York and London. The time zones, the pressure, the sheer exhaustion were taking their toll. I could hear it in his voice, see it in the deepening shadows under his eyes during our occasional video calls. He was stretched thin, a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. One Friday night, my phone rang. It was Leo, his voice uncharacteristically flat. "The deal fell through," he said. No preamble, no hello. Just the bald, unvarnished fact. All of it. 6 months of work. Gone. I could hear the clinking of ice in a glass, the hollow sound of a man drinking alone in a sterile hotel room 3,000 miles away. I listened as he recounted the collapse, the political maneuvering, the betrayal by a colleague. It was a story of corporate intrigue, but underneath it all, I heard the story of a man who felt like a failure, a man who had poured everything he had into something, only to watch it turn to dust. "I am so tired, Alex," he said, his voice finally cracking. "I am just so tired of all of it." And in that moment, a quiet, instinctive impulse took over. "Come home," I said. It was not a question or a suggestion. It was a command, a plea. "Just get on a plane and come back." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "My flight is not until Sunday," he said, his voice weak. "Change it," I said, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Just come home." He landed at the local airport late the next afternoon. I was there to pick him up. When he walked through the sliding glass doors, he looked like a ghost. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was pale, and he moved with the heavy, deliberate slowness of someone utterly depleted. He did not say a word. He just walked over to me, dropped his bags, and wrapped his arms around me. It was not a friendly hug. It was the desperate, clinging embrace of a drowning man finding a piece of wreckage. I held him, my heart aching with a fierce, protective tenderness. I could feel the tremors running through his body, the deep, shuddering breaths he took as he buried his face in my shoulder. We stood there for a long time, an island of stillness in the bustling current of the airport, and I knew that something fundamental had broken in him, and something equally fundamental was shifting between us. I drove him back to my apartment. His own place, a sterile condo downtown, was the last place he wanted to be. My apartment was small, filled with books and plants and the organized chaos of my work, but it was a home. I made him tea, and he sat on my couch, staring blankly at the wall, the untouched mug growing cold in his hands. He did not want to talk, and I did not push him. I just sat with him, providing a quiet, steady presence. As evening bled into night, he finally seemed to surface from his stupor. I do not think I can be alone tonight, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a raw, unguarded vulnerability I had never seen in him before, not even when we were children. It was the look of someone who had completely run out of armor. You do not have to be, I said softly. You can stay here. The couch is comfortable enough, he nodded, a flicker of relief in his eyes. Thank you. That night was the first time he stayed over. It was the beginning of the ritual. He fell asleep on the couch almost instantly, still in his clothes from the flight. I covered him with a blanket and stood there for a moment, watching the way the dim light from the street lamp outside traced the exhausted lines of his face. The love I felt for him in that moment was so immense, so overwhelming. It was a physical ache in my chest. It was a love stripped of all romantic projection or selfish desire. It was just a profound, all-encompassing need to protect him, to offer him a safe harbor in his storm. I went to my own bed, but I did not sleep. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sound of his breathing from the other room, a steady rhythm that was both a comfort and a quiet torture. He stayed for the whole weekend. We did not do much. We ordered takeout, watched old movies, and mostly just existed in the same quiet space. He slowly started to come back to himself. The color returned to his face, the light to his eyes. He started talking again, not about work, but about everything else. We talked for hours, just like we had in the church basement, excavating the shared history of our childhood, rebuilding the bridge between our past and present selves. By the time he left on Sunday evening, the atmosphere between us had changed. The line between friendship and something more, a line I had so carefully patrolled for years, had begun to blur. He had sought refuge with me. He had shown me his brokenness, and I had not turned away. He had let me take care of him. And in doing so, he had unknowingly opened a door I thought had been locked and bolted forever. That first weekend established the new pattern of our lives, the quiet ritual that would come to define the next several months. Leo did not stop traveling for work, but his trips became the parentheses around his time at my apartment. My home became his base, his sanctuary. It started with a plausible excuse. After a particularly long trip to Asia, he called me from the airport, his voice thick with jet lag. "Hey, Alex," he'd said. "Any chance I could crash on your couch tonight?" The thought of going back to my empty place, dealing with the mail, the silence. I just do not have it in me. The request was framed as a one-time convenience, a favor between friends. Of course I said yes. How could I not? And so, he arrived with his suitcase and a weary smile, and the ritual began in earnest. The first few times, he slept on the couch. I would leave a blanket and a pillow out for him, and in the morning, I would find him there, curled up amidst the cushions, looking younger and more vulnerable in sleep than he ever did when he was awake. I would make coffee, and the quiet domesticity of it all was a sharp, sweet ache in my chest. We would sit in the morning light, sipping from our mugs, the silence comfortable, the unspoken thing between us a living presence in the room. He never explicitly said why he kept coming back, and I never asked. We operated under the tacit understanding that he needed a place to land, and I was willing to provide it. It was a fragile, unspoken agreement, and I was terrified of doing anything that might shatter it. My internal world during this period was a tumultuous landscape of hope and anxiety. Every moment with him was something I both craved and dreaded. I became a scholar of his smallest gestures. The way he would lean in closer when I was showing him a new photograph I had developed, his arm brushing against mine. The way he would sometimes just watch me as I worked in my makeshift darkroom, his expression unreadable. I would analyze these moments for hours, turning them over and over in my mind, searching for a sign, a clue, a confirmation of what I so desperately wanted to be true. Was this just friendship, a deep but platonic bond forged in a shared history and present crisis? Or was it something more? My mind was a courtroom, with hope and fear as the opposing attorneys, each presenting a compelling case. Hope would point to the undeniable intimacy, the emotional vulnerability he only ever showed me. Fear would counter with the plausible deniability of it all, the convenience, the lack of any explicitly romantic gesture. I was living in a state of suspended animation, perpetually holding my breath. The transition from the couch to my bed was, like everything else, a gradual, almost accidental escalation. After about a month of this routine, he came back from a grueling trip to Germany. He looked thinner, more worn down than ever. He collapsed onto my couch with a groan. "I think I am getting old, Alex," he said, rubbing his lower back. "This couch is starting to feel like a medieval torture device." He said it with a laugh, a self-deprecating joke. But I saw the genuine discomfort in his eyes. My heart started to pound. I had a choice. I could offer him an extra pillow, some painkillers, or I could open another door. "You can take my bed," I said, my voice sounding much calmer than I felt. "I can take the couch. It is no big deal." He looked up at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "No, man, I could not do that. It is your bed, it is fine," I insisted, my resolve hardening. "I want you to get a decent night's sleep. You look like you need it." He hesitated for a long moment, a silent battle playing out behind his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said softly. "But only if you are sure." I was not sure of anything, except that I could not bear the thought of him being in pain. So that night, I slept on the couch, wrapped in the blanket that still held the faint scent of him, while he slept in my bed. The irony was not lost on me. We had traded places, but the dynamic felt more unbalanced than ever. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of his presence just a few feet away, separated by a thin wall. The apartment felt smaller, the air charged with a new level of tension. This arrangement lasted for 2 weeks. He would take my bed, I would take the couch. We never spoke of it directly, but it became the new norm. And then, one rainy Tuesday night, the final boundary was crossed. He had come back late, soaked from the downpour. He had showered, and I had made him some soup. We were sitting in the living room, the sound of the rain a steady drumming against the window panes. He was quiet, contemplative. When it was time for bed, he stood up and stretched. He looked from my bed, visible through the open doorway of my bedroom, to the couch, and then back to me. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "What is?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "This whole arrangement. You on the couch, me in your bed. It is a big enough bed, Alex. We are both adults. It is just sleeping, it was just sleeping." For simple words that felt like a seismic event. He was right, of course. It was a perfectly logical, practical solution. And yet, it felt like the most illogical, impractical, and terrifying suggestion in the world. My mind raced, searching for an excuse, a reason to say no, to maintain that last, crucial boundary. But I could not find one that did not sound insane. My silence stretched on for a few beats too long. He must have seen the hesitation on my face, because his expression softened. "Look, if it makes you uncomfortable, just say so. It is not a big deal. I can take the couch. My back will survive," and there it was. The out. The chance to retreat back to the safety of the previous arrangement. But I did not take it. Some part of me, the part that had been starving for this closeness for a decade, could not let this opportunity pass. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It is not uncomfortable. It is fine. It makes sense." So that night, for the first time, We shared the bed. The space felt enormous and impossibly small at the same time. I lay on my side, my back to him, my body rigid with a hyper-awareness of his presence. I could feel the heat radiating from him, could hear every soft breath he took. I was acutely conscious of the few inches of mattress that separated us, a no-man's land of unspoken feelings. I did not sleep at all that night. I just lay there, perfectly still, listening to the rain and the sound of his breathing, my heart a frantic, muffled drum against the mattress. I was terrified he would somehow hear it, that it would give away the secret I had guarded for so long. This became the new ritual, the final evolution of our arrangement. Every time he was in town, he stayed with me, and we shared the bed. We established an unspoken etiquette. We would get in on our respective sides, say goodnight, and turn away from each other. There was no touching, no acknowledgement of the intimacy of the situation. It was, as he had said, just sleeping, but it was never just sleeping for me. It was a nightly exercise in exquisite torture. It was lying next to the one person in the world I wanted more than anything and pretending I felt nothing. It was studying the way the moonlight fell across his pillow, memorizing the shape of his shoulders under the thin fabric of his shirt. It was falling in love with him all over again, every single night, in the dark, silent space of my own bedroom. The nights were a landscape of sensory details that I, as a photographer, could not help but catalog. There was the specific scent of his shampoo, a clean, sandalwood fragrance that lingered on the pillows long after he was gone. There was the subtle weight of his body on the mattress, the way it created a slight depression that I would sometimes find myself rolling into during the night. There was the sound of him mumbling in his sleep, fragments of words from dreams I would never know. These small, intimate details were the currency of our new relationship, and I hoarded them like treasure. My photography began to change during this time. I found myself drawn to images of domesticity, of quiet, intimate spaces, of the play of light and shadow in a lived-in room. My work became softer, more vulnerable. I was, in essence, trying to capture the feeling of lying next to him in the dark, the feeling of being so close to something beautiful and being unable to touch it. One night, I woke up to find that he had rolled over in his sleep. His arm was thrown across my waist, his face buried in my back. His breathing was warm against my shoulder blade. My entire body went rigid. I lay there, trapped by the casual, unconscious weight of his arm, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. He was just asleep. He did not know what he was doing. It meant nothing, but it meant everything to me. It was a glimpse of a world I was not allowed to fully enter, a casual intimacy that was both a gift and a curse. I did not move. I did not dare to breathe. I just lay there until the sun began to rise, memorizing the feeling of his arm around me, branding it into my memory. When he finally stirred and pulled his arm away, still half asleep, the sense of loss was so profound it was like a physical pain. This ritual, this nightly dance of proximity and distance, went on for 3 months. 3 months of shared beds and separate dreams. 3 months of my silent, one-sided love affair. It was a period of intense, quiet happiness and profound, aching loneliness. I had him closer than I had ever had him before, and yet he felt more impossibly far away than ever. The space between us and that bed was a universe of unspoken words, of repressed desires, of a friendship stretched to its absolute breaking point. I knew it could not last. A structure built on such a fragile, ambiguous foundation was bound to collapse. I just did not know which one of us would be the one to finally push it over. The crossing did not happen with a crash of lightning or a dramatic swell of music. It arrived on a quiet Thursday, on the tail end of a week that had been ordinary in every way. Leo had been in town since Monday, and our routine had settled into a comfortable rhythm. We would work separately during the day, me in my studio, him at his laptop at my kitchen table, and then come together in the evenings for dinner and a movie, or just quiet conversation. The tension that had initially defined our sleeping arrangement had softened, replaced by a familiar, domestic ease. The hyper-awareness was still there, a low hum beneath the surface of my consciousness, but I had learned to live with it, to pack it away with the rest of my secret feelings. That night, We were lying in bed, side by side in the dark, the way we always did. A soft rain was falling outside, a gentle, percussive sound against the glass. We were not talking, but the silence did not feel empty. It was a shared, comfortable quiet. I was on the edge of sleep, my mind drifting in that pleasant, hazy space between wakefulness and dreams, when Leo's voice, soft and tentative, cut through the darkness. "Alex." "Yeah," I murmured, my voice thick with sleep. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the subtle shift of fabric as he turned to face me. I remained on my back, my eyes closed, pretending to be closer to sleep than I actually was. It was a defense mechanism, a way to keep the walls of our carefully constructed platonic space intact. "Are you awake?" he asked, his voice even quieter than before, as if he were afraid to disturb the stillness of the room. I managed. My heart had begun to beat a little faster. There was a different quality to his voice, a note of vulnerability that was new, even for him. Another long pause. The sound of the rain seemed to grow louder, filling the space his words had left empty. I could feel his gaze on me in the dark. I could feel the energy in the room shift, the air growing thick and heavy with unspoken things. I kept my eyes closed, a coward to the last. If I did not see it, maybe it was not really happening. Then, he spoke again, and his words were so soft, so hesitant, they were almost carried away by the sound of the rain. "Would it be okay?" he started, and then stopped, as if losing his nerve. He took a slow breath. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" My eyes snapped open. The world, which had been a soft, blurry haze of impending sleep, came into sharp, terrifying focus. I could not see his face clearly in the darkness, only the vague outline of his silhouette against the faint glow of the window. But I could feel the question hanging in the air between us. It was not a proposition, not a move. It was a question, a plea for permission. It was an act of profound, terrifying vulnerability. He was giving me all the power. He was handing me the match and showing me the fuse, letting me choose whether to light it or not. My mind went completely blank. Every witty retort, every gentle deflection, every carefully constructed defense I had ever imagined for a moment like this evaporated. All that was left was the raw, thudding truth of my own heart, which was now beating so hard I was sure he could hear it across the small distance that separated us. Time seemed to warp, stretching that single moment of silence into an eternity. In that eternity, I saw two paths unfurl before me. On one path, I could laugh it off, make a joke, pretend he was half asleep and dreaming. I could say no. We could go back to the way things were, to the safe, agonizing ambiguity of our ritual. The friendship would be preserved, bruised but intact. My heart would remain safe, and it would remain broken. On the other path, I could say yes. I could step through the doorway he was holding open. I did not know what was on the other side. It could be a room filled with everything I had ever wanted, or it could be an empty void. It was a risk. It was the risk, the one I had been avoiding my entire life. I turned my head on the pillow to face him. I still could not make out his features, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze. I took a breath, and the word came out, not as a thought-out decision, but as a simple, undeniable truth, a surrender. Yes, the word was barely a whisper, but it landed in the quiet room with the force of a tectonic shift. For a second, he did not move, as if he could not believe what he had heard. Then, slowly, tentatively, he bridged the small gap between us. I felt the mattress dip with his movement. I felt the warmth of his hand as he gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was hesitant, questioning, as if he were still asking for permission with his hands. And then his lips met mine. It was not the kind of kiss you see in movies. There was no sudden passion, no desperate claiming. It was soft. It was unbelievably, achingly soft. It was a kiss of profound tenderness, of quiet discovery. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of rain and fear and a decade of unspoken yearning. It was a confession whispered in the dark, not with words, but with the gentle pressure of his mouth against mine. I kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion I had kept locked away for so long, all the silent nights, all the stolen glances, all the hopeless, secret love. It was a conversation we had been waiting our whole lives to have. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He did not pull away. He rested his forehead against mine, and I could feel his breath, warm and shaky, on my face. His hand was still on my cheek, his thumb tracing a slow, soothing pattern. We stayed like that for a long time, just breathing together in the dark. The rain had stopped. The only sound was the frantic, synchronized beating of our two hearts. He had not just crossed a line, he had erased it. He had dismantled the entire fragile structure of our friendship and had laid the foundation for something new, something terrifying and beautiful in its place. And in that moment, with his forehead pressed against mine, I was not afraid. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was finally, truly home. The aftermath was not the gentle dawn I had foolishly allowed myself to imagine. In the quiet darkness, with his forehead pressed against mine, anything had felt possible. But morning light is a harsh, unflattering thing. It reveals the cracks and imperfections you cannot see in the dark. I woke up first, to the pale gray light of a new day filtering through the blinds. Leo was still asleep, turned away from me now, a clear and deliberate distance between us on the mattress that had not been there when we fell asleep. The space felt cold, accusatory. The tender intimacy of the night before felt like a dream, a beautiful, fleeting illusion that was already beginning to dissolve. When he finally woke up, he did not look at me. He mumbled something about needing to get to a morning conference call and slipped out of bed, moving with a tense, guarded energy. The easy, comfortable domesticity of our previous mornings was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating awkwardness. He made his coffee in silence, his back to me the entire time. Every movement was stiff, unnatural. He was a stranger in my kitchen. The man who had whispered that vulnerable question to me in the dark was gone, and in his place was someone I did not recognize, someone wearing a suit of armor I had not seen in months. "I should probably head back to my own place tonight," he said, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from his mug. "Get my life in order. Thanks for everything. He had condensed the past 3 months, the shared meals, the late-night talks, the intimacy, the kiss. He had condensed it all into that one, dismissive word. It felt like a slap. I just nodded, unable to form a coherent response. My throat felt tight, my chest hollow. He left a few minutes later, and the closing of the apartment door echoed in the silence like a gunshot. I stood there in my kitchen, in the wreckage of my own hope, and felt a cold, familiar loneliness seep back into the room, more potent and painful than ever before because I had, for a few brief hours, known its opposite. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. He retreated. The constant texts became sporadic, then stopped altogether. My calls went to voicemail. He was building a wall between us, brick by painful, silent brick. I was adrift in a sea of confusion and hurt. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, dissecting it from every angle. Had I imagined the tenderness? Had I misinterpreted the vulnerability? Was it just a moment of weakness for him, a fleeting impulse brought on by exhaustion and emotional turmoil that he now deeply regretted? The fear that had always been my quiet companion was now a roaring monster in my head. I had been a fool, a convenience, a safe harbor he had used to weather his storm, and now that the storm had passed, he was sailing away, leaving me shipwrecked on the shore. The hurt curdled into a slow-burning anger, an anger at him for his cowardice, for being unable to face what he had started, but mostly an anger at myself for allowing myself to hope, for letting my guard down, for believing, even for a moment, that I could have something so beautiful. After a week of this agonizing silence, I knew I could not let it end like this. I could not let him turn our story into a ghost story, a thing to be haunted by. The quiet observer had to finally step out from behind the camera and into the frame. I had to demand an answer, even if it was the one I dreaded most. I needed the truth, because the ambiguity was eating me alive. I drove to his condo that evening. I had only been there once before, months ago, to help him move a bookshelf. It was just as I remembered, sleek, impersonal, and sterile, more like a hotel suite than a home. It was the architectural embodiment of his transient life. I stood outside his door for a full 5 minutes, my heart pounding, my hand hovering over the doorbell. I almost turned and ran a dozen times. But the thought of going back to my silent apartment, to the waiting and the wondering, was more terrifying than any confrontation. I finally pressed the button. It took him a long time to answer. When the door finally opened, he looked surprised to see me. And then, his expression shuddered, became guarded. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, but he might as well have been in full armor. "Alex," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking slightly, but I held his gaze. I would not be dismissed. He sighed, a weary, defeated sound, and ran a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted. "Now is not a good time, no," I said, a new, unfamiliar strength rising in me. "We are doing this now. You do not get to kiss me and then disappear. You do not get to do that to me." Something in my voice must have gotten through to him. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in a week, and I saw a flicker of the man from that night in my bed, the vulnerable, uncertain one. He stepped back and held the door open, a silent invitation. I walked in. His apartment was a mess. Takeout containers littered the coffee table, and clothes were strewn over the minimalist furniture. It was the apartment of a man in crisis. He did not turn on any lights, so we stood in the dim twilight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "What do you want me to say, Alex?" he asked, his back to me as he looked out at the city skyline. "I want you to tell me the truth," I said, my voice raw. "What was that? The kiss? What was any of this? Was I just convenient? A place to crash? Was that all it was?" He turned to face me, and his face was a mask of conflict and pain. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "God, no. It was never that." "Then what was it?" I pressed, taking a step closer. "Because this silence, this vanishing act, it feels a lot like I was just a mistake you were trying to forget." He winced as if I had physically struck him. "You are not a mistake," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He finally looked me in the eye, and what I saw there was not regret, but fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. "I am the mistake. All of this is," he gestured vaguely around the empty apartment. "This life, the constant running, pretending to be this confident, put-together guy who has it all figured out. It is a lie. I am a mess, Alex. I have been for a long time." He started pacing, the words pouring out of him now, a torrent held back for too long. "Coming back here, reconnecting with you. It was the first real thing I have felt in years. Being at your place, it was like I could finally breathe. You are quiet, and you are calm, and you are real. And I wanted to be near that. I needed it." He stopped in front of me, his eyes pleading. "And that night, I do not know what happened. I was lying there, next to you, and I just felt this overwhelming peace. And I wanted more. I did something stupid. I crossed a line I should not have crossed." "Why was it stupid?" I asked, my voice soft now. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching empathy. "Because look at me," he exclaimed, his voice rising with frustration. "I am this. I am chaos. I break things. And you are the best person I know. You are my oldest friend. I cannot be the one to ruin you. I cannot be another thing I mess up." And then I understood. It was not about me. It was not about his feelings for me, or a lack thereof. It was about his feelings about himself. He was not running from me. He was running from the idea that he was not good enough for me, that he was somehow fundamentally broken and would inevitably damage the one good, pure thing he had found. His withdrawal was not a rejection. It was a misguided, panicked act of protection. He was trying to protect me from himself. I closed the remaining distance between us, and, for the second time in my life, I initiated. I reached out and took his hand. His skin was cold. He flinched at my touch, but did not pull away. "Leo," I said, my voice steady and clear, "you are not going to ruin me. The only thing that has been ruining me is the silence, the not knowing." I looked into his scared, beautiful eyes. "You are not broken," I told him. "You are just human, and you are not alone in this. You think you are chaos? My entire inner world has been a hurricane since that day at the funeral. You think you are the only one who is scared. A small, watery laugh escaped me. I have been terrified every single second. A tear traced a path down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. You asked me a question the other night. I continued, my thumb stroking the back of his hand. You asked for my permission. You did not just take. You asked. That is not something a broken person does, Leo. That is something a good person does. I took a deep breath, ready to finally, fully step through the doorway. So, I am going to tell you the truth now. I am in love with you. I think I have been since we were kids, in some way or another. And that kiss, it was not a mistake. It was the most honest moment of my life. He just stared at me, his eyes wide, the tears now flowing freely. He looked like a man who had been told he could finally lay down a burden he had been carrying his whole life. He let out a shuddering sob, and then he collapsed into my arms, just as he had at the airport. But this time, it was different. It was not the desperate grasp of a drowning man. It was the exhausted, relieved surrender of a man who had finally found his way home. I held him, and he held me, and we stood there in the twilight of his empty apartment and began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. The resolution was not a sudden, cinematic crescendo. It was a quiet, gradual dawn. After the confessions and the tears in his sterile condo, a fragile peace settled over us. There were no grand declarations, no immediate plans for the future. There was just a shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that we had crossed a threshold and there was no going back. I did not leave that night. We ordered a pizza and sat on the floor of his living room, talking for hours. We talked about his fears, my loneliness, the years of silence, and the series of quiet miracles that had brought us back to each other. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had, stripped of all pretense and plausible deniability. Eventually, exhausted, we went to his bedroom. The bed was large and unfamiliar, the sheets crisp and impersonal. But as we lay down, he reached for my hand in the dark, his fingers lacing through mine. It was a simple, definitive gesture. An anchor. He did not pull away. He held on, and we fell asleep like that, hand in hand, a silent promise against the encroaching darkness. There was no ambiguity anymore. The vast, uncertain space that had existed between us and my bed was gone, replaced by the solid, reassuring warmth of his hand in mine. In the morning, the light did not feel harsh or accusatory. It felt gentle, like a new beginning. We made coffee together in his kitchen, the movements easy and synchronized, a silent dance of newfound domesticity. He looked at me over the rim of his mug, a small, genuine smile on his face, the first I had seen in what felt like an eternity. The exhaustion was still there in the lines around his eyes, but it was tempered by a new softness, a palpable sense of relief. So, he said, his voice a little rough, "What happens now?" I smiled back at him. "Now," I said, "you help me pack up some of your things. Because my couch misses you, but I think we can both agree that your back is better off in my bed." Permanently, his smile widened. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I would like that." And so, we began to build our new normal. It was a process of quiet integration. He did not give up his condo right away, but it slowly became little more than a glorified storage unit. His life began to migrate, piece by piece, into my small apartment. A toothbrush appeared in my bathroom holder. His running shoes found a permanent home by my front door. His laptop had its own designated corner of the kitchen table. My home, once a sanctuary of solitude, transformed into a shared space. The silence was no longer a sign of loneliness, but of comfort. We could sit for hours in the same room, him working, me editing photos, without needing to speak, content in the simple, profound knowledge of the other's presence. The ritual of sharing a bed was transformed. What was once a source of agonizing tension became the safest place in the world. There were no more unspoken rules, no more carefully maintained distances. There was cuddling. There were soft, sleepy kisses. There was the simple, profound comfort of reaching out in the middle of the night and finding him there, solid and real beside me. I learned the topography of his sleeping form, the way he always curled onto his right side, the way his hand would often find its way to my chest as if to make sure I was still there. These were the things that replaced the anxiety, the quiet affirmations of a love that was no longer a secret. He was still Leo. He was still driven and sometimes restless. He still traveled for work, but the dynamic of his departures and returns had changed completely. He no longer left from a place of loneliness and returned to a place of convenience. He left from a home, and he returned to one. Our goodbyes were filled with promises of return, and our hellos were quiet, joyful reunions. I was no longer just his anchor. I was his harbor, and he, in turn, became mine. He saw the doubt and insecurity I hid behind my camera lens and gently coaxed me out. He championed my work, celebrated my successes, and sat with me through my frustrations. He saw me, the quiet observer, and made me feel truly seen. One rainy afternoon, several months into this new life, I was developing photos in my darkroom. Leo was sitting on a stool in the corner, just watching me, as he often did. The red glow of the safe light cast him in soft, warm tones. I was swishing a piece of photographic paper in the developer tray, watching as an image slowly emerged from the whiteness. It was a portrait I had taken of him a few days earlier, sitting in the morning light at our kitchen table, a soft, unguarded smile on his face. It was, I realized, the best photograph I had ever taken. "It is funny," he said, his voice a low murmur in the quiet, chemical-scented room. "All those years, when we were apart, I always felt like I was performing. Like I was playing a part in a play about a successful, happy person. I had all the right lines, the right costumes. But I never felt real." I lifted the print from the developer and slid it into the stop bath, my eyes never leaving the emerging image of his face. "Being with you," he continued, his voice soft with a wonder that I felt mirrored in my own heart. "It is the first time in my adult life that I feel like I can finally just be. I do not have to perform. I can just be Leo. And I know that is enough." I looked up from the photograph and met his eyes across the dark room. The love I felt for him in that moment was calm and deep and boundless, a quiet, steady ocean. There was no more fear, no more anxiety. There was just a profound, unshakable certainty. We build our lives around certain structures, friendships, careers, homes. We believe them to be permanent, solid things. But sometimes, a storm comes and shows you that what you thought was a foundation was actually just a temporary shelter. And it is only when it is washed away that you are free to build something real, something true, on the cleared ground. The friendship I had with Leo was a beautiful, precious thing, but it was also a room with walls, a boundary I was too afraid to cross. He did not just open a door that night, he asked to kiss me. He, in his beautiful, clumsy, terrified way, knocked down the entire house. And together, in the quiet, honest space that was left, we began to build a home. A place where we were not just sleeping, but dreaming, together,